Good afternoon, friends. Today is Thursday, July 1st, already July. And this weekend, of course, we celebrate the 4th of July. But it's, in the life of the church, the 14th Sunday at Ordinary Time. It's another weekend, and the readings, particularly the words from Paul these weeks are rich because they're from the second letter to the Corinthians, which is one of, I think, one of his most tender, but also one of his most insightful kind of probing letters, or at least most evocative for me in terms of reflection and application to the human experience and to my experience. So I'd just like to share the reading from St. Paul that we'll hear this weekend from 2 Corinthians 12. And it's familiar to you, and really one of the most, one of my favorite passages in this letter. Brothers and sisters, that I, Paul, might not become too elated because of the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, an angel of Satan, to beat me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I begged the Lord about this, that it might leave me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. I will rather boast most gladly of my weaknesses in order that the power of Christ may dwell with me. Therefore I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and constraints for the sake of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Wow, who of us cannot take that and sit back with it and reflect on our own weakness, our own emptiness, our own struggles, and hope to know that sufficient grace, or that grace that empowers, the grace that suffices, the grace that makes up for, the grace that fills in that empty space. There's a great one of the little books that I carry around with me from decade to decade and reread, and always seems to offer something new, is just a little thin little volume called Poverty of Spirit, and it's written by Johannes Metz, a German theologian, and he must have written it like in the 60s or 70s. But he talks about, he really takes the beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, and unpacks what it means to be poor in spirit. And he looks to the example of Jesus himself in the incarnation, and God emptying himself of divinity, of Jesus emptying himself of all the divine privileges and truly becoming human. And therefore, in that gives us the model for holiness and this consistent self. When we empty ourselves, that's as we hear in Paul today, that's when the grace of God finds space to enter and thereby help us to become who we were intended to be. So in the case of Jesus, for example, Metz talks about the fact that in Jesus dying, he would never become who he's intended to be without his passion and death. Because in his passion and death, then, that's when he at last receives the grace, the life, the spirit, the new life, which he was intended to have, and fulfills his mission in revealing to us what it means to be human, to be truly human. So we can look at it in terms of our own death, of course, and because death for us is so mysterious, and whatever happens afterwards is, who knows. But the lesson for us, or what we cling to, our faith, is that, it's really in dying that we finally become who we were intended to be. So whatever being follows this, that's whom God intends for us. So, and therefore finally in our resurrection, we become fully human. In the meantime, we're here. And so it seems that, we never achieve who we are as Christians unless we enter into the mystery of suffering. None of us, of course, are spared suffering. I mean, it's not something we have to seek out in order to fulfill our Christian mission. All of us, carry. No, we may not have this thorn in the flesh, which Paul refers to, is the great, one of those great questions that can't be answered. I mean, people have combed every inch of St. Paul's life to try to figure out, like, what was it that Paul considered his thorn in the flesh? There's all sorts of speculation. Could it have been some kind of addiction? Was it a sexual thing? Is that why he can be sometimes edgy when it comes to sexual morality? Is it something? Was he having seizures of some sort, which of course at this time would have been completely inexplicable. There would be no way to figure out just what was leading to a person being overcome by something like an epileptic seizure. Could it have been something like that just baffled him and baffled all those around him? So, but we don't know. So we can speculate forever. We simply don't know, but we know that for Paul, it really bugged him. It was his thorn. And what is it? What is it for us? And or even what is it at this point in our lives? At a certain point, for example, I mean, I've referred to this. I'm sure I've talked about this, my own, I went through treatment for alcoholism in 2008. One of the lowest points of my life in terms of coming to terms with excessive alcohol, drug, drinking and all that. It was pitiable, but it was also then a time when I'd never experienced the grace of God so powerfully in terms of healing and coming to wholeness. Now, I didn't see that at the time, but looking back, it was an extraordinarily grace-filled experience, and I knew some of it at the time. I could feel I was being rescued, I was being saved, and there was something, there was all sorts of God in it, God's handprints on it. Or something, again, which I've spoken of, my own dealing with depression or anxiety. Again, it is a real thorn in the flesh for those who know it, because there's at times nothing you can do, it seems, to make it better. You simply at times have to wait it out, or wait until it lifts, or wait until you're in a better space, or wait until the medication finally works, or wait until you finally get the right combination of medication. It's just persistent. But it is, again, usually not at the time, usually not at the moment. At the moment, God's grace doesn't seem sufficient. It's like, where is God? But, slowly, if we, and this is what, I think discipline in the spiritual life demands. I remember being hospitalized for depression for the first time and visiting with Father Mike Erlander. He was the chaplain at the St. Joe's Hospital, and he was chaplain for a long time in his career at the University of Minnesota hospitals. And actually, I just saw him a couple weeks ago. He was at Sister Virginia's funeral, and we spoke. But I remember Mike Erlander saying to me, of course you can't pray, but know that, this is where the rest of the Christian community kind of steps in and does the praying for you. We're praying for you, And so even when we're not in the mood to pray, we plop ourselves in a pew. If we don't feel like coming to Mass on a given Sunday, we go. That's part of the Sunday obligation. It's like, just be there, because it's not really your work, but it's God's work. God might be doing something in you. So in any case, with something like depression, and depression is a complicated beast because of its physical dimensions and emotional dimensions and all of that. When you can't even get the energy to get out of bed, all you can do is just, open yourself to God's breathing for you. Just, God, keep me breathing. And so even there, in our weakness, the very reality of God keeps us alive. So in any case, and I'm going to wrap up here, it is when I am weak, then I am strong. It sounds like a fairy tale. It sounds like, oh, if only that were the case. Well, it really is the case. It really is the case. If we in our weakness can consistently, as believing Christians, realize that, we're following, this is what Jesus came to show us, that when we're dying, short of like the big death at the end, finally, you know, when those little ways in which we die each day, you know, if we can only remember to allow, you know, a crack so that God's Spirit can penetrate that. That's how we become who we're intended to be. That's how we become Christ bearers. That's how we, in our humanness, carry something of the divine. So I'd just like to end with a quote from Pope Francis. You know, a lot of discussion over the past couple weeks with regard to the Eucharist and the bishop's statement about, or proposed statement about the Eucharist, and all the controversy about whether or not it's intended to keep pro-choice politicians away from communion and all that. You know, Pope Francis, he quoted himself again in response to what was going on here. But his original statement is in The Joy of the Gospel, Evangelium Gaudium, which he, you know, published in shortly as his first great statement after he became the Pope. And he says, you know, about the Eucharist, it's not a prize for the perfect, but a powerful medicine and nourishment for the weak. We can say that specifically about the Eucharist and going to communion, and that being the great sacrament of Jesus' presence. But it also, of course, applies most broadly to Jesus' presence itself. You know, God doesn't come, Jesus doesn't come only to reward those who have been good. Jesus comes to be with the weak and the sinful, so that we can be strong in the face of it, that in our weakness is when we're strong. So God bless you. Thanks for tuning in. Have a blessed and enjoyable holiday week.